On September 12, 2025, the streets of New York City were glowing with cameras. It was Fashion Week, the biggest night for designers, models, and magazines. But this time, something unexpected happened. The spotlight moved away from the runway, and it locked onto just one guest. One seat at the Calvin Klein show created a storm that nobody saw coming. In a single night, over 1 million posts filled the internet, and all of them were about one man. That man was Jungkook. He became the most mentioned musician in the world, and he didn't even step on stage. For fans who had followed his Calvin Klein campaigns, it felt surreal, like a dream stepping down from the billboard and sitting front row in New York. It was the moment when fashion and fandom collided. But here's the question. What happens when a single celebrity doesn't just attend a show? He becomes bigger than the collection itself. Because what happened that night was more than style. It was a takeover. And in the next few moments, you'll see exactly how Jungkook shocked New York Fashion Week and why fans still can't believe it. This is the true story of his NYFW takeover. The night New York waited for fashion, one man stole the show. It was September 12, 2025. Inside the Brandt Foundation, the crowd was ready. The Calvin Klein show was about to begin. This was the Spring 2026 collection. Every seat was filled with stars and power, but one seat changed everything. Sitting there was Jungkook. The front row was his stage. Every camera turned toward him. Every flash lit up his face. And within minutes, the internet exploded. Over 1 million posts spread across the world. This was no rumor. This was no fan guess. Getty confirmed it with clear photos. It was real. The models kept walking. But the attention was gone. The clothes no longer mattered. The story was now him. No performance, no song, no speech. Yet one idol was bigger than the whole show. For his fans, it felt like a dream, like a billboard had come to life. For the fashion world, it was a shock. One celebrity had stolen an entire week, and that left one big question. How did Jungkook end up in that chair? The story of this front row moment didn't start in New York. It started in 2023. That was the year Calvin Klein made Jungkook its global ambassador. From that day, his face was everywhere. Giant billboards lit up cities with his black and white ads. Train stations, tall towers, and glowing screens carried the same image. The idol who ruled music was now ruling fashion walls. For 2 straight years, those images built a storm. By 2025, his name and the brand's logo had become one. Every new headline carried the same tag. Ambassador. It wasn't just a title, it was a global statement. So when fans saw him sit front row at New York Fashion Week, it didn't feel random. It felt like the moment they had been waiting for. For fans, it was like watching a promise finally kept. For the brand, it was a payoff, years in the making. The billboards had prepared the stage. The front row sealed it. One man had turned a campaign into a career move. One seat had turned an ad into a living story. But here is where the truth gets deeper. This was not just about selling clothes. This was not only about brand images, because behind this simple word, ambassador, was something bigger. Something that gave Jungkook's role more power than the runway itself. And that leads to the next secret. What made this ambassador role bigger than fashion itself? This night was never about fabric. It was about power. When Jungkook sat down, the whole meaning of the show changed. The runway was meant to display design, but the true design was in the seating chart. His presence turned the air heavy, not because of the clothes, but because of the crowd. Every phone rose high, every flash burned brighter, and online, the storm began. By the end of the night, over 1 million posts carried his name. Not the collection, not the models, only him. The numbers were brutal proof. One seat had beaten an entire catwalk. For fans inside, the reaction was louder than the music. They screamed his name as if it were a concert, not a fashion event. The models walked in silence, but the cheers belonged to him. It was more than fame. It was control. The new currency of fashion wasn't fabric. It was attention. And that night, Jungkook held every coin. The runway still glittered with fabric, style, and design, but all of that faded against the weight of his spotlight. He was not selling clothes. He was bending the value of the whole industry. The ambassador role had flipped into something stronger, an influence machine no designer could outshine. For fans online, it felt like proof that their idol was unstoppable. For fashion insiders, it was the nightmare they could not ignore. Because if one man can turn attention into power, what does that leave for the runway itself? What happened to the actual runway? The runway was supposed to lead. Instead, it became background noise. Every fashion roundup after that night said the same thing. The clothes were overshadowed. Headlines were clear. They didn't call the show a win for Calvin Klein's collection. They called it a win for Jungkook. The true star of the evening wasn't on the runway. He was sitting front row. This was the nightmare of every designer. Months of work, hundreds of stitches, a vision meant to go viral. Yet all the energy was stolen in seconds. The fabrics moved, but the spotlight didn't follow. It stayed frozen on the idol who never stood up. For designers, this was brutal. They dream of applause, of reviews calling their collections unforgettable. Instead, every major headline framed Jungkook as the reason people cared. The fashion world had to admit it. This night was his. But here's the question that kept echoing. Was this planned? Did Calvin Klein invite him knowing the risk? Did they want him to overshadow the very clothes they were trying to sell? Or did he simply take over, a force so strong that even the brand couldn't stop it? That conflict made the story even bigger, because if it was an accident, then one man had hijacked an entire show. And if it was planned, then Calvin Klein had willingly handed him the crown. Either way, the message was the same. This was no longer just fashion. This was celebrity dominance written in real time. But the world wanted to know, just how big did this moment get? How far did Jungkook's takeover spread beyond that room? By the next morning, the numbers told the story. Jungkook had taken over the world. On September 13th, 2025, reports confirmed what fans already felt. He wasn't just the talk of New York. He was the most mentioned musician on the planet. Over 1 million posts filled X in less than 24 hours. That's not Fashion Week normal, that's global viral storm. Every second, new clips of him sitting front row appeared online. Every fan cam, every photo, every tiny reaction spread like fire. The show itself blurred into the background. The seat had become the headline. Even major fashion outlets admitted it. The clothes had been outshined. And the spotlight now belonged to one man. For fans, this was proof of what they already believed. Their idol wasn't just a singer. He was bigger than the runway, bigger than the event, bigger than Fashion Week itself. For the industry, it was a warning, because when a celebrity can drown out a global fashion show, the old rules no longer matter. The momentum had flipped. The models kept walking, but nobody was talking about them. The designers had worked for months, but headlines ignored their names. Instead, the world woke up asking one question. Did you see Jungkook last night? What began as a seat had turned into a takeover. What began as a guest spot had become the story of New York Fashion Week. But behind every viral wave comes backlash. And not everyone in fashion was celebrating. Because if one man can hijack the spotlight, others will ask. Surely not everyone loved the hype, right? The morning after, the praise met its first wall. Critics pushed back. Some voices in the fashion world warned that the industry was losing its focus. They said the runway was built to honor design, not celebrity. They argued the spotlight had been stolen by hype. For purists, this was a betrayal. Months of craft, thousands of hours of work, forgotten in seconds because of one man in a chair. They claimed this wasn't fashion, it was a circus. But the reaction didn't stop there. Because while critics raised their voices, fans raised theirs louder. Supporters fired back, saying Jungkook didn't distract. He elevated the show. They said his presence brought more eyes, more buzz, more relevance than the clothes ever could alone. In their view, he gave the brand the kind of viral lift designers dream of. The divide grew sharp. On one side, insiders who demanded the runway return to purity. On the other, millions of fans who claimed this was the future. And the tension itself became fuel. Every argument meant more posts. Every clash meant more clicks. The protest against his influence only made his influence stronger. The very fight over whether he belonged proved that he did. Because in today's world, attention is the currency. And he had all of it. For critics, it was a warning. For fans, it was a victory. And for the media, it was the perfect storm. But beyond the noise, one question now loomed even larger. What does this reveal about the true power of a celebrity in fashion? What happened in New York wasn't just fashion, it was proof of a global shift. For years, luxury houses relied on Hollywood stars to sell their image. But in the last decade, K-pop idols have taken those seats, and now their gravity is pulling the industry east. Jungkook's front row takeover made the formula clear. The old math said fabric plus design equals fame. The new math says fandom plus influence equals power. And his fans showed it in real time. Over 1 million posts for one chair, one face, one moment. That number isn't about clothes, it's about cultural force. For Koreans, it was a milestone. Another sign their music and their stars had broken into every corner of the globe. For ARMY, it was proof their idol could stand anywhere, concert stage, ad campaign, or New York Fashion Week, and dominate. The emotional weight was heavy, because this wasn't only about style, it was about status. And in that moment, Jungkook didn't just represent Calvin Klein. He represented an entire wave of Asian influence reshaping luxury. That was the mini twist most insiders didn't want to admit. The runway wasn't just losing to a celebrity, it was losing to a movement. The attention wasn't centered in Paris or New York anymore. It was flowing from Seoul to the world, and the fashion industry now had to face it. This was no accident. It was a new order. So the real question isn't whether Jungkook won that night. The real question is, what comes next after shutting down New York Fashion Week? After that night, the question changed from what happened to what's next. Speculation flooded the fashion world within hours. Would Jungkook simply remain the face of the brand, or would he step into something even bigger? Whispers grew about a possible capsule collection, a limited line carrying his name, his style, and his direct influence. For Calvin Klein, that would mean more than just another campaign. It would mean building a product around a global idol. And for fans, it would mean wearing a piece of their idol's vision. Others imagined something even louder. What if he actually walked the runway next season? The thought alone sent shivers through ARMY and fashion insiders alike. Because if sitting front row could break the internet, imagine the storm if he actually took the stage. Fans already shared edits online, picturing him side by side with models. The excitement itself became part of the story. It wasn't just about clothes anymore. It was about the suspense of his next move. Every headline asked the same thing. Would he stop at being an ambassador, or would he rewrite the rules of fashion once more? The countdown was on. For the brand, it was an open door. For the fans, it was a dream waiting to be real. And for the industry, it was the most dangerous kind of spotlight, one they couldn't control. Because now, it wasn't about whether Jungkook had shocked New York. It was about what he planned to do with that power. And that leads us to the real truth. What's the secret behind this New York Fashion Week shock? Jungkook didn't just attend a fashion show. He turned New York Fashion Week into his show. The runway was planned for months, yet a single seat became louder than every model, every outfit, every design. That was the twist no one saw coming. In a world where fabric once defined fashion, a global idol showed that power now comes from influence. The true lesson was brutal but clear. Star power can be stronger than couture.